My guest today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive interviews is Marian McPartland, highly regarded jazz pianist, author, radio personality, composer, and welcome. You look wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you
Monk,
here.
it's nice to be here, but I get nervous when I hear all those things being, that laundry list of things I do.
Well, you've earned them, and I don't know if you noticed, I kind of borrowed your introduction from piano jazz.
Oh, really?
Yes. I listened to a few today. And
oh, you did? Well, they must be all right then, because sometimes I have quite a job. I mean, depending on who it is, but it's kind of fun making up something to introduce the guest with.
Can we talk about that for a moment?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
It's been 78. You started
79.
79. And
it's still up close to 18 years.
Yeah.
And so far, it's the longest running show on NPR. I don't know what they call it, educational entertainment or something, but I feel really lucky. I never thought I would be a radio person.
Yeah, and to meet all those folks along the way has just been absolutely amazing, I would guess.
Well, the funny thing is, I probably did know a good many of them already, but as time has gone by, there are people I've wanted to have on the show that I hadn't met already, like Bela Fleck. And I admired him from afar on TV, and I thought, gee, that would be nice to have him on piano jazz. So we did, you know, and various other different people. As a piano player from a big band with Maria Schneider. I wanted to have her on the show, and she says, oh, I play terrible piano. She absolutely refused to do the show. She said, why don't you have my piano player, Frank, now I'm drawing a blank on his name, but a wonderful piano player. So there's somebody else I hadn't met. Anyway.
When you do the shows, are they fairly spontaneous, or are you able to sit down beforehand and say, let's do these tunes?
Well, that much we do, make a sort of list of tunes, but also, if need be, if the guest wants to change tunes in midstream, that's fine. I mean, we don't just start and keep going till the end. We stop and start, and the producer is very picky, and she might stop me because I bumped my foot on the pedal or something.
Well, I'm always impressed by your ability to match with the people, and when Joe Williams says, well, let's do this song, and you say, what key? And you do it. I mean, this, I think, is something that not everyone has, that can play all those tunes in different keys. And do you have to do a little homework beforehand?
Not for something like that, because unless he was going to pick some new tune and put the sheet music in front of me, that would be the worst thing he could do. But I mean, I know all his tunes and anything he's likely to do, and he's such a nice person. He wouldn't stick me with anything I didn't know. So as long as I know the tune, I can do it in any key, and I don't care about that. It's fine.
Yeah, and sometimes it seems like unexpected things happen. I mean, Benny Carter played mostly piano with you.
Well, I don't know why that was, because I wanted him to play his horn, but I can't remember whether he said he forgot it or left it on the table. I think he wanted to play piano. At least I got that feeling. But I mean, he does play sort of nice, arranges piano, but it was a different side of him. And of course, I love all his tunes. I did woodshed a few of those tunes so that we could play them.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
I like that term, arranger's piano, actually. I think I'll probably borrow that.
Well, it's true.
It's a compliment, and it's a qualifier, too.
Well, it sort of lets you know that it's not an Oscar Peterson piano player.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, Benny really played very well. And there's other people you can qualify that way, like Jerry Mulligan. He's another one, and he definitely, I know he wanted to play piano, and he said the same thing, and he left his horn on the kitchen table.
They probably wanted to get to play with you, see what that felt like.
I don't know, but Jerry is a good pianist. He's more than arranges piano, and I just heard that show the other day. They reran it. I hadn't heard it for ages, and sometimes it's good because you hear something, and I think, boy, that really was a good show. Whereas at the time, I wasn't that sure that it was good.
So now that you've done so many fine musicians, is it more of a challenge to find people to do these days, or is there constantly a new selection to choose from?
Well, both. I just thought of the guy's name. I shouldn't give him without a name. The guy that plays in Maria Schneider's band, Frank Kimbrough, and he's somebody you're definitely going to hear about.
Okay.
But in answer to your question, well, it's both. There still are a lot of people out there that I probably should have asked, or for whatever reason. There's just too many of them. Like, I just got around to calling up somebody named Tony Monte. Do you know him?
Tony?
Monte, M-O-N-T-E. He's been around the Newark scene for years, and really good player. And just somehow I never got to it. And then, of course, there's people I would like to have and probably never can, like Stevie Wonder. I mean, to get through to him, I'd probably have to get in a plane and fly over his house and drop a note or something.
That would get his attention, I think.
Well, maybe I've got to do something, because he's a person that would be a really good show, and I know all his tunes, or enough of them.
That reminds me, of course, I was going to get to this a little later, but we'll go there now. Remember when you came to my high school in 1974, I think?
Yeah, sure.
And you played Sunshine in My Life.
Did I?
Yes, you did. And, of course, at that time, that was a pop hit.
I mean,
and the kids loved it. And I've often wondered, are some of those situations where you get in front of a high school audience, have they been tough along the way?
Not too bad, truthfully. I mean, I haven't played for a big group of high school kids for a long time. I think depending on where they are, like if it was a New York City school, I think I would have to be armed and dangerous to be able to put over anything to those kids. But I don't know. I haven't been asked to do one, but it would be a challenge. But I do quite a few high school and college dates, and I do every year do a thing with a high school band in Port Washington, because I figured they really ought to know something about jazz since I live there. And we really have quite a good little band going now. Of course, unfortunately, they leave and go to college, but a lot of them have actually stayed in music. It's quite amazing. So I do that, and then different college dates. Utica College, it's one I guess I'm going to play again sometime later this year.
Well, I remember whoever sponsored that tour put you up in a motel that had no phone or something, and I felt pretty bad about it. And has there been times, I don't want to get too personal here, but has there been times in your career where it's been like a struggle?
You mean financially dealing with no phone?
And trying to find your way into making a living as a piano player.
I mean, probably the worst time was when Jimmy and I first came back, or my first time to the States, and we lived in Chicago. But actually, we stayed with his relatives, until the money ran out. That was mostly Jimmy being very open-handed with all the relatives. So for a while we did have a little apartment in Chicago, but I mean things were never really bad. I mean, it might be that a couple of weeks would go by without getting a gig, but touch wood, no, nothing is ever. I mean, I feel sorry for anybody that's in that position because I never have been. Have you?
Yeah.
Really?
I think they call it paying dues, you know.
Oh,
So
well, that
builds character, you know.
I mean, that's what they say, but I mean, I feel as if I'm still paying dues. I'm still not necessarily financial dues, but other things,
Right.
which I don't have to go into right now. But basically, I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing and working a lot and be busy. I mean,
Yeah.
it's.
Can I take you back to when you met Jimmy? And it must have been quite an experience to be a young lady in the World War II. You started with the British version of USO, is that right?
Yes.
Was that like did you have a contract with them? Was it a volunteer thing, or was it was a real
I
job?
think we had a contract. It was a real job. In fact, at that time, I had the choice of either being drafted into the Women's Army or going into some kind of entertainment. So naturally, I decided I would do that immediately. I didn't have to think about it at all. So the pay was pretty decent, and we played all over the country. Accommodations and travel were not always the best because, you know, there's a war on, and there would be bombs dropping once in a while. But then I switched and went with regular American USO. Somebody said, oh, you ought to join USO. The pay is better, and you'll meet all these wonderful American guys, stuff like that. And I thought, oh. So that's what I did, and then we worked. It would be a regular show, like with a comedian, a singer, dancer. They had a guitar player, and then I was the piano player, played for the whole show. And it was the same kind of thing, but on a higher level, and we stayed in wonderful hotels. So then it got to be where they were going to have the invasion, and after the invasion, they were sounding people who wanted to go over to France. Of course, I wanted to go, and did go with the first group, which was about a month after the invasion. And we went over in a boat, and we had helmets and combat boots and everything the GIs had, except the guns. You know, I felt like MacArthur wading ashore onto Omaha Beach and straggling up the beach, and we knew how to put up pup tents. But we never had to, because somebody always did that for us, you know.
I wonder if there's any pictures of that.
Unfortunately, no. If I had known what I was going to get into, I didn't take pictures. Oh, there are some. Yeah, there's some, but yeah, there are some now that I think of it.
Yeah.
But I should have kept a diary, and anyway, we went through all these miserably bombed and strafed towns that were just a mass of rubble. And we finally arrived in Belgium in a rest area. It was called Eupen. And they had a big band, and they had all kinds of stuff going on, and the various shows would come there to rest. And it was like they had an officers' club. And that's where I met Jimmy, one of the people in the USO show. Willie Shaw, who was a comedian from Chicago, knew Jimmy. He said, oh, we can't have this man out there being in combat. We've got to get him into special service. So that's what they did. So that's how I met Jimmy, because he then became a member of this little band. But first they had a big party for him. All the band members and people are saying, Jimmy McPartland's coming, Jimmy McPartland's coming. And I'm going, who? I'd heard of Bud Freeman and Sidney Bechet. I hadn't heard of Jimmy yet. And they had the party in this tent, and they were going to have a jam session. And Jimmy always told me afterwards, "Oh, I saw you across the tent, and I knew you wanted to play." And I said to myself, "Oh, a woman musician, she wants to play, and I know she's going to be terrible." "And you were," he said. But I really wasn't terrible. I think I just didn't know how to play with a big band at that point. You know, I soon learned. But anyway.
And how do you play with a big band? I mean,
well,
to our piano players who will be watching, you know.
Well, I mean, now I don't. At that time, I guess I got in the way. You know, you learn how to accompany and play behind a soloist to give them more confidence, or let them know where they are in the tune or something like that. You don't play all over the piano,
right.
So, which is, I guess, is what I was doing at that time.
Well,
so
you guys hit it off pretty quickly together?
Well, you know, yes, we did. And I guess going out every day early in a weapons carrier to entertain the troops, and going, maybe we had to perform on a flatbed truck, or they'd build a stage out of boards, or it would be raining and they'd put a tarpaulin over the piano and stuff like that. It wasn't exactly the greatest, but they just loved it, and then they would wine and dine us, and it was something. So, you know, there we were. So I think it was a case of propinquity, if that's a good word, like we were there. And so it just followed on that we would get together. And of course, I admired Jimmy's playing, and he started to tell me that he liked my harmony, and so one thing led to another.
Real harmony.
Yeah.
From a logistical standpoint, it must have been interesting seeing what kind of instrument you were going to deal with every day. From a, you know, what kind of piano were they going to find for me?
Well, it's funny because I thought it was going to be terrible. In fact, one of the prerequisites of the job was that you would learn to play accordion in case there were no pianos. Oh boy, I've never lived this down. But I never had to actually play the accordion because they had these wonderful little, like a GI piano, which was not quite a full keyboard, like a small upright, painted gray, army style. And I always got to play on one of those. I never had a problem. And then when we were in Eupen, Jimmy went out to somebody's house, some people that had been branded as traitors, and removed the piano and put it on a truck and brought it over to the theater for me. And this was like, oh, he went out and got a piano for me. Oh, no.
What a nice gesture.
Yeah, so that sort of fixed the deal right there. So we got married over there in Aachen, Germany.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Coming to the States and after the war, when did you get to New York, and was it still the heyday of 52nd Street when you got to New York?
Not quite, because we arrived in April of 1946, and we only stayed for a few days. Jimmy wanted to go to Eddie Condon's, and that was the first place I sat in and showed off my repertoire of Dixieland tunes. And we stayed at Gene Krupa's house. He was very, very nice to us because he's an old friend of Jimmy's. They worked together, of course. And we visited some clubs. I was hot to see everybody that I'd read about or heard on records. We met Louis Armstrong, and he was working in a club. And a whole bunch of people. We went to Nick's. And anyway, Jimmy didn't want to stay. He wanted to go back to Chicago and see the family. And it was sort of a turning point because Eddie Condon offered him the job with the band, I think while Bill Davison was taking a leave of absence or something. And I said to Jimmy, you really should take it. And he refused. I've got to relax, see my family. God knows what would have happened if he would have stayed there, but I guess it was not meant to be. So we went to Chicago instead for a few years.
Yeah. Well, Chicago was a decent town for music, wasn't
Oh, wonderful. I loved Chicago. I still love it. And we sort of broke in with working with different clubs. I mean, that might have been sort of maybe the thinnest part financially, was kind of for Jimmy to break back into things.
Yeah.
And we did do a lot of interesting gigs, however, and then I don't know if you probably don't remember, you're too young, Dave Garroway, who was, before he ever came to New York to be on the Today Show, he had a coast-to-coast radio show, and Jimmy was the soloist on that, and he sounded wonderful. I still have that recording of that. And anyway, Jimmy kept saying, oh, you should have your own group, you should have your own group. And so we came to New York in 1950, I guess, and we stopped on the way and played a club in Philadelphia that was very famous at the time, called the Rendezvous Club. And I met people like Sidney de Paris, Wilbur de Paris played with the band. And so then we went on to New York, and that's when I started at the Embers. And Jimmy really arranged so many things for me. But it was tough because I was so green and callow, and this was a top club, and I had great sidemen, Ed Safransky from Kenton's band, and Don Lamont from Woody's band, Woody Herman's band, who were trying to break into the jingle scene in New York. And so, I mean, that was my first trio group. And at that same engagement, the owner brought in Roy Eldridge and Coleman Hawkins as guests. So can you imagine, I got to play for them too. I do have pictures to prove that, because that's something I was very thrilled about. And they were very nice. Nobody ever said, don't play that change, or don't do that. So I guess I got by some way.
What did the average club date at that time pay?
Well, when you say a club date, you don't mean like a club date for a wedding. That's what we call club dates, like for a wedding or like one night out. You mean an actual nightclub?
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember exactly, but not a lot. I can only tell you when we opened the Hickory House, the first salary I got was about $550 for 3 people. And at the time, nobody complained. We all thought we were doing fine, you know. And then he very magnanimously raised it to 600 in dribs and drabs, like 600, 650. I don't think we ever got past 700.
And that was was it your responsibility, being your trio, that you dealt with a club owner?
Yeah.
And they have a lot of reasons why they can't pay you more, I would imagine. You know.
Well, I don't know any reason except being cheap and miserable to deal with. Well, this guy was, because we really did great business at the Hickory House. And he used to look around the club, and I would say, nice crowd in here tonight. And he'd say, yeah, they're all drinking beer. I mean, God forbid he would think business was good. I might want a raise.
Right.
So, I guess, I mean, as I think of it now, I mean, I remember mostly the good things, because I had a great trio. Well, actually, for openers, I had a guy named Mel Zelnick, and I'm trying to think who the bass player was. That's awful. I can't think, but anyway, I think we had Vinnie Burke for a while. And then my main trio, after a couple of months, was Bill Crow and Joe Morello. And I mean, that was the main trio for about 3 or 4 years.
That's quite a group.
Yeah. And I still berate Dave Brubeck whenever I see him, because he and Paul used to come in the club, and I would think, oh, isn't that nice? They really like the trio. But he was really coming in to size up Joe and steal him, which of course, but I mean, Joe had to move on. He couldn't stay with me forever. But anyway, thinking back, 10 years of being in there was a good gig.
You had a lot of times, would you feel pressured when Duke Ellington came in the room? Or, I mean, I know you went out of your way to play some of his tunes, and he apparently liked it.
I think I felt pressured, or you get a sort of adrenaline going or something. In fact, Joe used to, I remember he said to me, oh, why do you always have to play an Ellington tune just because he came in, and he thought I was being obsequious, and I probably was. But there was some pressure there. But then I remember we were in Washington, D.C., and Art Tatum came in. Oh, man, that was heavy. But, one deals with it. I didn't stop playing or anything, but all kinds of people came into Hickory House, Benny Goodman, Oscar Peterson, you name it. And then it was also I guess word got around that I didn't mind having people sit in. And Bucky Pizzarelli would come in, and Sal Salvador, and various. In fact, that's how I got Joe, actually, because I had Mousy Alexander on drums, and he met Joe, who had just come to town from Springfield, Mass., and invited him to sit in. And then I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I've got to have this guy. Oh, I've got to work this out. And then it worked out because Mousy decided to go with the Sauter Finnegan Band. So then I got Joe Morello. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm talking away here.
That's why we're here. Was there, obviously, it's been different for you as a woman pianist to be fitting into what is essentially a man's world in jazz.
Oh, yes.
Was this something you've dealt with since you got here? Was there ever a point where it was an advantage to you, or has it always been pretty much kind of an uphill struggle?
I don't really think it was ever an uphill struggle for me, because I sort of had my indoctrination from working with Jimmy, and boy, Jimmy was so supportive and proud of me. And so when I started at the Embers with the trio, and Ed and Don Lamont, they couldn't have been nicer. I mean, very seldom did I have a bad experience. I did have one guy at the Embers for a short time. I can't think of his name just as well. And I had to fire him, and boy, having to fire somebody, that just really, I could probably do it now with great aplomb, but luckily I haven't had to. But I never had a real problem there. The only problems, or not problems, but things would be, like, I remember the first review I had from Leonard Feather was, she has 3 strikes against her. She's English, white, and a woman. And I don't know, it didn't bother me that much. I don't remember being too upset about that. And the worst things would probably be from the audience, like, oh, you play good for a girl, or you sound just like a man. I mean, we don't hear those things anymore.
Right.
And I mean, there were a lot of women on the scene: Mary Lou Williams, Barbara Carroll, people I'd heard before I got there, Hazel Scott, Lil Armstrong. I never felt that the women were so in such bad shape. I guess they went ahead and they had consciousness raising, and I remember talking to Barbara about this, and she said, well, I didn't notice a thing. We'd just been playing and doing our thing right along, and I never had to feel that things were tough. Never did.
Yeah. I think it's often the case when the people that are doing it aren't aware that there's a real problem. I think sometimes it's the people that are observing from outside, you know, think that there's a problem that needs to be dealt with, perhaps.
Well, and there were some women who were trying to get gigs. Like somebody I recently had on Piano Jazz, a bass player named Carleen Ray, who's really wonderful. And she said years ago that she would get a call for a gig, and as soon as the person knew it was a girl, he'd hang up. And but I don't think it was all that prevalent, truthfully. And although I'm sure that you know, in a way, I mean, we're all doing well, but I think there's probably still a little air of male chauvinism there.
Yeah. Well,
but I don't care. I mean, I still like things like having the door open for me, and I don't have trouble with political correctness.
Right.
If the bass player wants to put his arm around me, that's okay.
Well, I'm going to remember that when we leave, okay? That I'll probably put my arm around you and open the door.
That's fine. I love it. I look forward to it.
I suppose in a perfect world, it might not be necessary to have. I was just reading the other day that I think in 2 weekends there's going to be a women's jazz festival in Washington, I think it is.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe, as I said, in a perfect world, it wouldn't be necessary to have a women's jazz festival. That they would just have a jazz festival, and there would be a proportional amount of women players.
Well, we always said this, like when they had the Kansas City Women's Festival. That was a long time ago. I think you were probably a real young boy then. I can't remember how long ago. Gee, maybe it's 15 or 20 years. And this was the biggest women's jazz festival ever. Mary Lou Williams played it, and I played it. Toshiko Akiyoshi had her big band, and I mean, it was a large event, and they carried that on for 3 or 4 years, and then they ran out of money. So actually, what Billy Taylor is doing, it's the same kind of thing. He had it last year, but they called it a tribute to Mary Lou Williams, which was fine, and I was in it, and the Maria Schneider big band, and Joanne Brackeen. And I mean, they certainly didn't have to want for good women players. Jane Ira Bloom, wonderful sax player. So I don't exactly know the cast of characters for this year, but some of them. Trudy Pitts, good piano player. I can't remember. They have Maria Schneider's big band again, and there's another woman's big band called Diva.
Right.
Very, very good. But it's true. I mean, you don't ever have to say Woody Herman and his all-male band,
Right.
but yet you do have to say Diva is an all-girl band. It's still a novelty, and maybe it always will. I don't know.
It's almost the same in sports, you know. They're trying so hard to have professional women's basketball, for instance, you know, and it's an uphill battle, I guess.
Well, I mean, for everything, like I remember years ago, like doing TV shows, and you never ever saw a woman camera person or a woman being an assistant producer or a producer, whereas like now my producer for Piano Jazz is a woman, and my manager is a woman, and my publicist is a woman. You know, and I'm thinking, gee, what's going on? I'm surrounded by all these chicks. I would like to get away from this. What happened to the guys? If they hear me, I'm not serious.
No, I know. We can edit it out. Let me talk about your own music for a while.
Okay.
You've written some wonderful tunes, which you have the luxury of playing on your own records, which I think is nice.
Well, I've played 1 or 2. Now I made this, you may have heard this new CD with strings that I did a whole bunch of my own tunes. Finally, I thought, well, I'd better do this before I lose my brains or my something. I'd better do it, so I did.
When you first heard the arrangements played, Did they
Yeah.
sound like you were hoping?
Yes, they were very nice. I know I did make maybe one or two little minor adjustments, but very little. The hard thing was that Alec Broadbent had written the arrangements and he knew what was going on, and I was looking at them for the first time. We had a rehearsal, but only one, and then the next day we started recording, and it took me a while to kind of assimilate what was going on. I'd hear something and I'd think, oh, have another take, don't do that again. You know, eventually we got it together because they were really nice arrangements. I just had to get my act together.
Do you usually have a concept beforehand when an opportunity to record comes up and you're thinking about your next album? Do you think, in a broad sense, this album is going to be about standards, or it's going to be about something else? How do you decide that kind of thing?
Oh, let's see. Well, a few years back, I did have an idea. I wanted to do some tunes by Billy Strayhorn because it seemed like nobody had. And it turned out that I and Art Farmer was sort of the sole people who had done an entire record of Billy Strayhorn music, and I feel rather proud of myself for that. And of course now it's happening all over the place, and they're going to make a movie about him. So I'm really glad all this is happening. And then I don't know really why. I guess I had met Benny Carter finally, and for some reason or other, I really wanted to do a record of Benny Carter's music. And Carl Jefferson of Concord, he was dead against it. And one of his reasons was, oh, Benny wants so much money. And, well, he just was against it, but I really wanted to do it, so I finally did do it. And Benny has nice tunes, really good tunes.
I was thinking also about one of your records called Ambiance.
Oh, yes.
Which to me sounds like really free.
Yeah, it was.
Very quite free. And I was wondering if this is how you went into this record and said, we're really going to, I don't know what phrase to use, push the envelope here. You know?
No, I think I was pretty much doing that kind of thing because I had Michael Moore with me, who was very much into, in fact, he wrote several of those tunes. It's funny, after a while, Michael Moore became very conservative, and I always felt bad because it seemed like he led me into this, and every time somebody's around that is going to be a little free, I'll fall back in. I mean, I can't really do it by myself. Trying to think exactly when it happened. I think I was playing a place called The Apartment. I think this was in before I made Ambience anyway, before I had Michael Moore. And this drummer named Jimmy Kappas kept saying, well, why don't you play free? Why don't you play some free things? And I really couldn't sort of quite understand what it was I had to do, and I kept trying, and I'd always end up on a triad or something. And finally, I was able to do that very thing. I mean, I can do it. At that time, I probably never would have thought of doing a piano jazz with Cecil Taylor. But it's funny, now I love doing that, but I don't know why more of it doesn't enter into the music. It could. It could. I don't know. I sort of seems like I've become, if not more conservative, I don't know, I should do one of those out records again, because I really am, it's one of my favorites.
it's almost as if you almost have to force yourself to forget some of the things that you have relied on in the past and see if things come out somewhat by accident. I don't know. I've never been able to do it myself.
Well, actually, what's your instrument? I'm trying to remember.
Saxophone.
Right. Well, actually, Michael Moore had written several of those tunes that were on Ambience, and then I had written Ambience, and there were a couple of other things, but we had this very freestyle drummer too, Jimmy Madison. He was on most of the tracks, and Billy Hart was on the rest of it. And boy, if I could just set up that same thing again, I probably would get into that same bag. You're making me think I should do some more. I mean, I can, and I do. Like every time on Piano Jazz, if the guest wants to do it, we'll do at least one free piece.
Yeah.
Some of them turn out better than others, but it's always a kick doing that.
Well, there's always tonight, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Or the next day.
That's true.
Was you mentioned having discussions with the fellow that owned Concord, you know, about you wanting to do one thing and he's going, no. Was this kind of thing help you to make the decision to start your own record company?
Oh, that happened long before I went
that was
to
before.
Concord.
Uh-huh.
That happened, in the 60s, I think, when there seemed to be a great influx of rock music and not too much jazz was being recorded, or not. Maybe people like Monk and Miles were being recorded, and nothing much was happening for me. And then Sam Coslow, who wrote a whole bunch of tunes, starting with Cocktails for Two. And it's funny because that really, people think of Spike Jones,
I know,
but it really is a pretty tune.
Uh-huh.
He's written a lot of well-known tunes, and that's the only one I can come up with right now. Anyway, he said, oh, if you'll make a recording of my tunes, you know, I'll pay for the date and everything. So he did, and I had Ron Carter and Grady Tate on the record, but Sam, I think he wanted it to be more commercial than it was, and he had some girl singers on some tracks going doo-wah, doo-wah, you know, and he was paying for the date. I couldn't do much about that. Anyway, that experience, I remember saying, oh, the hell with it, I'm going to make my own damn record. And I did. That's when I started with Halcyon. It was like the last of the cottage industries. But so many musicians, they had the same thing, like a mail order record company. And I actually have about 18 really nice records on Halcyon, some of which have been put out by Concord or their parent company, Jazz Alliance. I did an Alec Wilder recording of all of Alec's tunes, and that came out.
You had a special relationship with Alec.
Yes, I guess so. He's a very good friend and a lot of fun. I miss him a lot.
Yeah.
He was so funny and so bright and erudite, and I don't know, he would recommend books for me to read, and I guess he was really heavy into the environmental thing before a lot of other people were. And so I miss Alec a lot, but he used to write all kinds of pieces for his friends, and so he wrote several pieces for me, which I recorded.
He seemed to have a real way with a bass line, moving it wonderfully.
It's funny, it was one of Alec's, I remember Alex saying to me about a certain one of his tunes, I forget, maybe it's I'll Be Around. It has a descending bass line. At any rate, I remember we were talking. He said, boy, I'd kill for a good bass line. And I know what he means, because you have to just have a certain sequence that's going to really set up a tune or sound good as part of the tune.
Yeah.
I've always been aware of that.
Yeah. Do you think that jazz can be successfully taught to play?
I don't know. Sometimes I think it can. I think, well, I actually did about a 3-month period in the Washington, D.C. schools, and we got a huge grant for this to go around to the public schools with just this thing in mind, to teach kids to play jazz. And I used all the local musicians, and one of the best tunes I thought to get kids started to play would be a blues, and then we picked C-jam blues because it's so repetitive, and the kids had these little instruments it's like a vibraharp, about 2 octaves they all had to play on. And we did, in fact, get kids to not only play this tune, but to improvise on it. And we culminated with a concert with Duke. He came down and played with a small group for kids in the school, and it was one of the great experiences of my life. So at that time, I thought that they really had done some good things, and it was a shame that they couldn't follow through. Like after we left, the program just fell apart, and it broke my heart because we really had kids improvising with the Navy band, which was what an experience that was. I'll never forget. Anyway, I guess I basically think that you can if somebody is interested, you can point them in the right direction. I think kids have to be motivated, and I think if they really want to do it, that's half the battle. And then they will investigate and listen. That's a part of it. But I've done workshops and stage band clinics and things where you hear some of these kids and you think, oh, this kid will never play. Next year, the kid comes back having listened to Bill Evans or somebody and is playing away, and I'll never say never about anybody, because I think it takes wanting to do it and motivation, and that's about it, really.
Well, I think you said a very important word there, too, and that was listen. He listened to somebody who inspired him to make sense out of what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
I guess.
We even have those experiences with piano jazz. People saying they heard a certain tune, or they heard what we're doing and they started to take piano lessons, and all this kind of stuff. It's really very gratifying. And some of them are people in their 70s and saying, well, I just thought I'd get started because I heard you playing one of my favorite tunes. And you know, like, well, am I too old to start? You know, and I'm saying, well, if I'm older than you and I'm doing it.
I'm still out there gigging. Yeah.
Yes, still out there gigging and hopefully doing it for a while.
Okay. So here's an imaginary young lady. She's 20, and you happen to meet her somewhere, and she says, Marian, I really want to make a living as a jazz piano player. What would you suggest that she think of something else to do, or what would you say to her?
Well, I probably would say, well, can you play? Do you have a piano? Who do you listen to? Can you play? And if I'm in a room, well, play me something. Or have you taken lessons? You know, I don't want somebody that hasn't done anything. I mean, they have to sort of have an idea about it. Once in a while, I get somebody, some dilettante who'll say, well, I don't really want to take piano lessons. I just want to play a few chords like George Shearing. And I say, well, you can't do that. You know, there's no way you could do it. You've got to do the whole thing or nothing. So,
wow. Yeah,
it's a good one.
You have any gripes about the music business that you'd like to put on film?
Oh, well, I'd like more money.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't think of one offhand. I mean, it's terrible. I know I have some, but I can't think of anything really serious except being put in a motel with no room service. It's probably one of my most serious gripes.
Yeah. When dancing, when jazz was connected with dancing, and it then became more disconnected, do you think that hurt the music at all? Do you think it turned the music into something else that it wasn't conceived as first?
I don't quite know how to answer that, but I do remember, of course, all these wonderful bands that people did dance to, and going to the Statler Hotel in New York with Jimmy night after night to hear Tommy Dorsey's band. Of course, Jimmy knew Tommy. And then all the other bands, the Benny Goodman Band. And I mean, I listened to big bands in England. I guess that's where I learned tunes. And to quote Winton again, he has always said that jazz should be danced to. But then I remember playing some gigs where we would be quite huffy because they were dancing and not listening to us. And actually, there's probably a lot to be said about that question, because people dancing certainly knew all the tunes, loved the music. Maybe we should start doing that again.
Count Basie said he learned from watching people how they reacted to the music, where to set the tempo. You know, I guess it was important to him anyway.
Well, but in this particular area where we are right now, Jimmy and I used to play a gig at the Dinkler Hotel in Syracuse, the infamous Dinkler, we called it. And people loved to dance. They were a bit loud, actually, but I remember really enjoying that, because we had Frank Tate on bass, and we had a George, oh God, isn't this awful, and he's a local drummer, very good drummer. And we just played tune after tune after tune, but that was when I was able to call on my extensive repertoire of tunes, and it was really a good experience, seeing how people loved it. And now things have changed, so I guess playing in a concert hall is a whole other thing, and people do seem to like it.
Yeah.
But I would never feel bad if I had to play for dancing.
One last thing I'd like to ask: when your parents found out that you were going to leave school to play in a vaudeville act, can I guess that they were not really in favor of this?
Oh, God. Well, I didn't really know I was going to do that. I had gone to this piano player, Billy Mayall, thinking he would give me a few pointers about jazz. And I mean, I was so stupid. He wasn't really a jazz player so much as a popular player. But of course, he did play good chords and good harmony and everything, and rhythm. And I didn't know that he was starting this 4-piano group, and I guess I impressed him enough that he hired me right then. And of course, anyway, they were shocked, and my father offered me £1,000 if I wouldn't go. And I said, no, I want to go. And of course I did go. And I'm sure that they must have, there must have been terrible scenes in the family. I mean, I didn't realize until years later how awful that would be to my family.
Yeah.
And anyway.
And did they ever have the opportunity to see you doing your thing?
Unfortunately, they didn't. One of my, he wasn't really an uncle, he was a second cousin who was the mayor of Windsor, Sir Cyril Dyson. He and his wife came over. They had a convocation of mayors or something like that. He came to the Hickory House, and he really looked appalled. And after the set, he said to me, "Margaret, does your father know what you're doing?" It was like I was playing in a brothel or something.
No
And I
kidding.
said, "Well, I'm only playing, you know, I'm not," because I was sitting in the center of the bar and they had all these bottles of booze all around the bar. It wasn't the most elegant spot, but it was a great jazz place.
Yeah.
So, but I always loved that. But no, they didn't see me, but they read a lot of write-ups. And I suppose they might have been proud of me, but I think they were sort of mystified, like, why would she want to do that when she could have settled down and got married to a lawyer or a doctor or something
Yeah.
like that? Because what I did was not considered nice by them. It was definitely not nice.
Well, we're very glad you did.
Oh, I'm very glad to Monk.
Yeah. Well, I'm so pleased that you were able to join us for the Hamilton Jazz Archive.
Me too.
Where are you headed next?
Well, to Columbia, South Carolina, we're going to do a live piano jazz with Bobby Short. We just did one about 4 weeks ago with Tommy Flanagan in Cleveland. It's really fun doing a live with an audience.
Yeah.
And a lot more concertizing and piano jazz, more of the same schools, a couple of schools, and on and on.
Keep it up. Thanks
Yes,
so
I
much.
will.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.